Martine, is so good to have you back. I just wanted to
Mm,
jump right into this because you've been on the podcast twice before, and I'll put the episode links in the show notes below if you haven't checked those out yet. But third third time is the charm, right? It's so good to
it
have you back. How are
is.
you feeling?
I'm good. I'm good. Busy because it is like officially summer here in my country, which just means it's the hottest time of the year. That's all it means, right? 36 degrees and humid. And yeah, busy with a lot of activities with the kids,
Mm.
extracurriculars, sports, just the mom. Mom's the word right now. Like
Yeah,
mom's the
right.
word.
Really being active all the time.
Being active, hands-on mom. Yeah, that's
Mm.
it for me. And working, like still in the coaching, mostly part-time. I just work in like my mornings and then the rest of the day it's really for the kids. So, yeah, a good balance, I would say,
Yeah.
a very good balance.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Really good.
Mm,
I mean, that's something that I've always had on my mind. That would be something that I would love to do, to have that
mm,
kind of a balance. So I
yeah,
love the fact that you are modeling that kind of a balance to a lot of women, showing that it is possible to have a home-based business. It's possible to be present with your family and your children. I think that is just precious. We need to see that being modeled to
yeah,
us.
yeah. It's always a choice. Like, the author Patricia Allen says, like, women have to feel good to do good. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
really living from the feminine sensorial experience. Because if we don't feel, and the word feel is the key word here,
Mm.
then we can't do good things. We can't produce our podcast. We can't like make our content. We can't be with our
Yeah.
children and like be worried about a gazillion things, right? So we need to like fully own that that is a part of our identity as females, like as women has to feel
Yes.
good so that we can do the good things, right?
Oh, yeah. And that
Mm,
is sort of a great segue to our topic of today, which is sensuality, why
mm,
femininity is sensuality, and especially from the standpoint and perspective of a Christian, faith-based
mm,
viewpoint. And knowing both of us have observed in our own lives and with women around us that there are a lot of like stumbling blocks that women encounter. They feel fear. They see a lot of um misconstrued narratives about sensuality being sinful or wrong or bad or something that will automatically lead you to this Jezebel kind of life.
oh my goodness.
And while many of us and many of the ladies that I've talked to, we sort of understand with our brain, with our mind, that okay, maybe that's not the case, but the fear is still there. It's still playing a big role on an unconscious or subconscious level. And
Mm,
many of my women, they feel this desire to get, shed that layer, that fear and that misconstrued narrative about sensuality, but something
mm,
is still feeling sticky. So, what is
mm.
your experience, Martine? Have you observed this phenomenon? And especially like with your background in the evangelical context, and
Hmm.
how does that play in that context in general?
Yeah, so I think like the question that a lot of women who are like maybe not just Christian, but they come from a faith-based type of lineage is what is right and what is wrong. It's
Yes.
always that question. It's always a question of, is this moral? Is this immoral? Is this ethical? Is it not ethical? Is it correct? Or is it incorrect? It comes from that place. It comes from that piece because all faith-based lineages, they protect their followers with norms and systems and ways of behavior, right? I mean, like, for instance, the in all of like Christian lineages, for instance, it's a well-known fact that you get married before you live together. Because in that frame, or even in like like strict Judaism or strict Islam practice, that is also like a religious frame. Like you do not live together prior to the covenant of marriage, right? So jumping off from that, we have to realize that that framing is present in all other aspects of like human perception and behavior, including the relationship we have with our bodies, which is really the piece that I find that faith-based women struggle with when it comes to hearing the word sensuality. So sensuality, if we're going to look at like the dictionary definition, it doesn't have to, like, there are many definitions in the dictionary, but it does not immediately have to do with sex.
Yep.
And typically, because I come from a, religious lineage, because not only was I Catholic, like baptized Catholic, but I grew up from the age of like 15 in like the American evangelical conservative purity culture / biblical Christianity amalgamation, right? So I experienced like the full range of how a nominal Christian might view things like, like sex before marriage, and like a practicing like biblical Christian persuasion application of it. So my experience has been, I've seen it all. Like I've seen people who they're just, by definition, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, and I don't really pay attention to like what it says in the Bible, but I believe in Jesus and all of that, versus I believe in Jesus and I'm trying to live like biblically, right? Like I've experienced all of it. And so I find that on those sides of the pendulum, you can kind of see the difference in perception as to what um, living as a Christian is. So I can talk about the Christians because I am one. I've been through like a whole like kaleidoscope of what that is. But for me, the experience was it wasn't good to be in the body, because you can't control your emotions, or your emotions can't, like, you can't feel them because they're going to lead you to your carnal desires. And like carnality is something that we're supposed to put to death. You're meant to put your flesh to death, all of the things. That was my biggest like paradigm growing up from 15 onwards. And I just ran with it. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling some kind of way about boys, suppress. Like, no, that's not good. It is going to lead you to sin. It's going to lead them to sin. And you have to like be the gatekeeper of young men, and lusts of the flesh and everything. So mine was a very, like, I want to overcorrect the relationship with the female body and also the male body, because what do you do when you're a teenager and your body, you're just in all of your hormones in your body. So I tend to also coach some of these women who've been raised with similar connotations and like an aperture, like with a camera, you can change the lens and you can adjust the aperture so it's a certain type of focus. My focus was purity culture. That was the aperture through which I viewed sensuality. Like, if you're a sensual being, you have sexual intentions. That's how it was positioned for me. And that was actually very inaccurate, because what that did was also kind of like dehumanize sex and even sensuality as like banal, like only animals do that, like you're not animals, you're these like spiritual beings. So it was very, very dogmatic, right? My experience of sensuality as a thing was, it is of the flesh. And for Christians, that has come to mean, but that's not the right your flesh is not your body, right? The flesh in terms of the teaching and the doctrine in Christianity is the thing that has died prior to who you are in Christ. That is the flesh, right?
Yeah.
So I confuse the flesh with anything to do with my body.
Oh yeah, that's an easy one to confuse.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
of course,
And
like it
so,
would, because you hear the word flesh and you sort of mean, well, that, or think that it means the body. It's very
mm,
easy to conflate those two or confuse those two. And I think
correct, correct.
most of us have been there.
Hmm. So when I sit with women these days, and some are Christians, some are not Christian at all, um, what I find in common is they don't know exactly what they mean by sensuality, or they have a dominant paradigm around it, usually something they've unconsciously believed. So, like those that were raised in the church, unconsciously believe that sensuality only has to do with sex within marriage, that you are only a sensual being once you have gotten married. And then you have those who don't have that frame, and sensuality still has to do with sex, but being sexy and being kind of like archetypally sexy in like the feminine female persuasion. So there's no true like frame of what sensuality is based just on what the body is experiencing and what the body is um, responding to, right? In the environment, not even to another person, but just like, how does your body feel when you are, surrounded by nature? And there's a sense of kind of openness in your system. That's a sensual experience. But for most people, that isn't the definition of to be a sensual being. It's like, oh, that's just feeling the air blowing on your body. Like that's what that is. They don't connote it immediately with a sensual and sensorial experience, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of the interesting observations that I've had with religiously inclined women, with women who are, maybe they were never raised in a faith-based community, but they're coming from a culture that is also very much in the head
Mm-hmm.
and consumptive in like information wise, and never really tuning into the question of, well, what do you feel in your body? What is the felt sense that you have in your body about this thing happening in your life, or this event that you just this experience that you just experienced, right? It's not a common, it hasn't been a common inquiry that these women have had.
Mm. Yeah. So true.
Hmm.
So why is using biblical figures, as you say, a lazy or a weak way to embody a walk with Christ?
Because of how the Bible has been contorted, right, in its proper use and function. So, so just to be transparent, I've done a bit of deconstruction. It's kind of like admitting to doing AA, like you're, I'm a Christian and I've deconstructed. It's funny, but that never like led me away to the truth of what the Bible is. And the Bible really is a series of books documenting the journey of humanity with God, a particular lineage, by the way, right? And it's the Jewish and the Hebrew lineage that led to Christ. Okay, so I look at the Bible now, and I look at it at how it was used when I was a child. So when I was a child, gosh, if you are ever familiar with the IBLP teachings, that is how the Bible was used. So IBLP is if you all are familiar with the umbrellas of authority doctrine, kind of like the Bill Gothard doctrines of
Right.
authority. That's kind of like how I grew up. And the Bible was used, Bible verses were cherry picked to defend kind of this almost cultic um, behavior modification of humanity, right? And so my experience of the Bible was one to correct, just correct. That is all. It's a correction book. It is basic instructions before leaving Earth, right? If you're an evangelical, you know that that's made into a song or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not what the Bible is. And so, like, when I see women calling another woman a Jezebel, that's exactly what I mean about the Bible being used as a correction book or as it's like a fairy tale book. And then you pick a character and you immediately apply her like as an archetype to a woman who is, I don't know, like she's wearing a dress with no cover on the shoulders, right? Like it's become a joke almost to call somebody a Jezebel without understanding that this was a real human being, right? With not to say that she was admirable, but like this is a historical figure that did some pretty crazy things when she was alive, right? And historically has gone down in infamy for being controlling, manipulative, narcissistic, immoral, like she sacrificed children to her gods, right? So a lot of women have this unconscious disrespect for how to use the Bible, right? And I don't think a lot of them see it. And that's why I call it a lazy kind of like insult. First of all, like as a woman who believes in Christ and who claims to walk in the teachings of the way, to insult a woman and call her a Jezebel or anything. You can call her a Gomer or like a Ruth or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You can praise her with an archetype or you can destroy her with an archetype in the Bible. Um, it's a lazy use of scripture and it's an irreverent use of what the Bible is, right? I mean, let's not go down the rabbit hole if you have to dissect the Hebrew and the Greek and you have to dissect the connotation of what the situation was when the text was being written. I don't want to go down there, but a lot of women, and I'm speaking to the women here, a lot of women who are not even scholarly and are not even learned in the exegesis of scripture cherry pick something like Queen Jezebel and say, oh, that woman's a Jezebel.
Mm.
So I think that that's why it's lazy. It is irreverent. It is profoundly disrespectful to God, in my opinion, right? As a Christian, for us to call a woman a Jezebel or any like documented historical figure in a book that is the most studied book of all time, that is still being studied to this day because we haven't fully unraveled what it really is,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So rather than hurl a archetype as an insult to a woman should actually be invited to look at herself on why she is projecting this judgment and, and why she is using something as holy as the scriptures to get her point across.
That's a really great question that we should keep in mind.
Mm, yeah.
What how would you, if you noticed yourself, let's just, paint this hypothetical
Hmm.
scenario where you notice and you sort of come to this observation of yourself having these judgmental
Hmm.
thoughts about a woman and just in your mind calling her
Mm,
a Jezebel, for example.
hmm.
What are the questions that you optimally would be asking yourself when that happens, if you are able to hold that curiosity and observation there and not attached
Mm,
to the feeling or the thought itself?
mm. Well, first of all, whenever I realize there's a trigger that is coming up for me, and I guess because I've been in this space for a while now of self-inquiry, right, is where is that coming from? What part of me is being hit by what this woman is doing, right? So that's the first inquiry, like what is this hitting and why? So that appeals to the things that we have like relegated to the back of our thoughts and our subconscious, right? So these are the hidden parts of us, the parts of us that we do not love about ourselves, have not accepted about ourselves, right? That's what a trigger is. And it's to kind of like invite that into the light, to be brought to the truth. And a lot of the times it's simply starting there and saying, oh, because when I was, so let's say you want to judge a woman and you want to judge her because unconsciously it makes you feel better about the things that you haven't forgiven, loved, accepted, reparented within yourself, right? Um, is to first understand like where the trigger and the emotion, the trigger, the emotion that comes with the trigger, where is kind of like the gap between those? And that gap, right? That's actually the opportunity for you to release the judgment first on yourself and then on why you would judge this other woman, right? And this is the kind of like the invitation for like the feminine woman, right? It's when we are in impulsiveness, right? When we go with the impulse of the trigger, we don't see that gap. We just feel the emotion and then we just attack because the trigger has been exposed like a wound with salt, right? But and we can talk about like how the feminine kind of like responds in inflammatory situations is breathe first. Like, whew, okay, I am triggered. Like, hold up, girl. Like, rein in the horse. Kind of like don't go like blazing into this woman's field with an insult, right? And say, okay, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it in my body? And for some women who, they feel some kind of inflammation, like emotionally, it's either here in the heart or sometimes it's in their gut. And an interesting question I ask them is where you feel it is where it could be living, like in your body, and simply to just relax that part of the body. It's a very like somatic experience to witness when you are in a trigger, to notice like how you are acting out with that emotion and let yourself occupy that gap. And usually that gap is the space for you to kind of like breathe and just like lean back a little bit and say, okay, like, wait a minute. I do not have to participate in this. For the Christian woman, that means, is this going to lead me to sin? Right? Because if it is going to bring you out of alignment with how you say you are following Christ, then it's not worth it to hurl the insult, even if it's a biblical insult, you know? So it's really that. It's like, okay, breathe, notice the trigger. Where is this coming from? What am I feeling in my body? And then releasing that, breathing into that area in the body where that tension kind of like is knotting you up, and then recognizing, okay, like I survived that. I actually didn't have to say anything. I didn't even have to think anything about her. It was simply just an invitation for me to see if there is anything that I get to heal, that I get to bring to the light, that I get to pray about. If you're a Christian or a woman of faith, like, okay, God, like I'm jealous of this woman. There's something about her that, I remember that girl in high school who bullied me, all sorts of things when I work through this with my clients. They remember usually like an instance where they felt that sensation, right? And oh, okay, it's tied to when I was 13, this happened. When I was 12, this girl did this to me. When I was 15, this other girl liked the same guy that I liked and I felt unseen. All sorts of revelations, right?
Yes.
And so triggers and the temptation to be inflamed and act on impulse is really an invitation for us to heal
Mm.
and to release and to let go.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. So let's play with that. hypothetical scenario a little bit more.
Sure.
Let's say that you are a woman who's following Christ and you notice this trigger, you have that spaciousness to observe it, to not act on it, but then you do realize that there is actually jealousy behind that, that
Mm.
is the driving emotional force. And now
Yeah.
this woman is like grappling with reconciling the fact that she is jealous, quote unquote, of someone who is doing something wrong. How do we sit with that? How do we unravel that?
Yeah, yeah. So this is the beauty kind of like of being in your body, because typically we will just go with what the mind says and then let the mind be the let the body be the instrument of the mind. So when a woman is jealous, and I'll use wives as an example because I work with a lot of wives, right? And let's say there's a wife and she feels like some kind of way about this woman that her husband is talking to at work, right? Very real situation because, her husbands go to work, they're with women in their workplaces and whatnot. And she's like, I'm jealous. I'm jealous at, like of this woman in your workplace, right? And by the way, this has happened. Um, so how does she do that? How does she contend with this emotion, like this very real emotion? Well, first of all, we have to invite ourselves as to why we're jealous or why we think there's jealousy there. Is there lack of trust in my husband? Is there some insecurity around my own marriage relationship with my husband? Because jealousy just doesn't pop up. There's a reason behind. There's an unconscious reason most of the time behind that. And so to inquire first, like, where is this coming from? Next is to seek clarity. And I teach the wives this when they need to have this conversation, because there's nothing more insidious in a marriage relationship than to keep secrets of emotional intimacy from your husband. So they get to be very vulnerable. They'll be like, Martine, I'm so ashamed to ask this of him. And I'm like, you'd regret it if you didn't, because you'd be letting like that jealousy marinate like in your own like egoic projections of what that is. Like, so I guide them to seek clarity with their husbands and to be very vulnerable. Like, babe, I need to talk to you about something. I would love if we could talk about it. When would you be available? It's coming from a really serious place inside of me. And so they'll sit with their husbands, they'll make an appointment for when this is, and then preface it with, honey, what I'm about to ask you and bring up, I'm so ashamed of. It's been, like in my body, it's been driving me to some kind of tears in some kind of way, but this is it. And then opening it up to her, honey, I'm jealous. Like, I've been feeling some jealousy around, this woman colleague of yours. And I don't know, maybe it's because, I think she's prettier than me. And I think that, she talks better than me and all of the things. That is actually where you nip that jealousy in the bud, because you don't give it time to occupy space, like energetic space inside of you, right? Because you've brought it to the light. So the thing with the masculine, whether it's your husband or it's truth, it's a penetrative and at the same time a healing energetic. So when a woman is honest with her, whatever she's colluding with as a thought or a projection on her husband, she is actually giving herself the gift of vulnerability, right? That is a gift of surrender, of vulnerability, of openness and transparency to him. And typically, like depending on what their relationship is, this will reveal something about the relationship, whether her instincts are on point about something and there is something deeper at the heart of their marriage, or she was just in her illusions and her own unhealed projections. And in this case, she was just projecting. There was nothing going on between this woman and her husband. There was just, she was jealous of an aspect of this woman that was related to past events in her personal history prior to when she met her husband. So the lesson here is to not let the emotion, if it is going to affect like a physical relationship, to not let it fester in the ego, right? And to not let it harbor any type of resentment through secrecy and through collusion, like with the ego. That's number one. And in a marriage relationship, you as a married couple have the obligation for transparency towards each other, right? So in that case, that ended very well because there was a new kind of like development of trustworthiness between the both of them. There were assumptions. So usually with women, it's our assumptions that really plague us. And all of them are just rooted in some aspect of trigger or projections that we haven't looked at consciously. They've not been brought into our consciousness. And when a woman can be vulnerable with what she is being worked by, like jealousy, to her partner or to her husband, it is very healing for her, even if at the onset she feels uncomfortable contending with that. Right.
Yes. That is such
Mhm.
a good way to look at it and so necessary. I love the point that
Yeah.
you make about jealousy. It really takes hold of us when it is in secret, when we give it
Yeah.
that sort of space to
Mhm.
really be lodged and take space in our body, in our mind, and it thrives in secrecy.
It
Right. That is
does.
such a good point. So let's say that this woman is not married,
Mm.
that she is still, in the period of waiting and looking, desiring to be married, but she goes through the same thing, same
Jealousy. Yeah.
trigger.
Okay. So I love bringing in like female and male biology into this piece because I teach a lot around courtship, those dynamics, right? And anthropology has revealed to us that women have adapted using certain behaviors to be, if men have adapted to be aggressive, they have been traditionally the sex that combats, goes to war, dies for the country or the empire. Women have never had to do that, but we've had to adapt to be with each other. And jealousy, envy, manipulation, passive aggressiveness. These are some anthropology will like anthropological biology will call it adaptive behavior, like maladaptive behavior, because
Mm-hmm.
we've created certain weaponry, not in the physical realm of men, but like in the realm of our emotions and our projections. Like that is how women attack one another. That's why there's a joke that we are gossips. That's an example of like a maladaptive behavior to try and control a situation or protect oneself. Another is like passive aggressive behavior, flattery, frenemy is a newer evolution of that and definition of that. So when a woman is going through jealousy, the first thing, at least in my teaching spaces, that I make her aware of is this is human. This is human nature. It is a part of how we have adapted. This is beyond religion. Okay. This is why religion has a provision for it, though, right? Like Christians, for instance, you are meant to submit or take every thought captive, for instance. That is a part of the teaching. It's one of the like doctrines found in the New Testament. Submit every thought to Christ. And that means like you have these human nature characteristics that may not be in your best interest, right? So if you're a woman and you don't even have to be a Christian to submit your thoughts to whatever it is that is a higher purpose for you, life itself, the divine, God, submitting that jealousy to scrutiny could look like, for the Christian, praying about it. Like, God, I'm, like feeling some kind of jealousy, like for other women who are getting married and other women who have boyfriends and other women who have children. Like, I'm just sad about it, God. So that's one way. Like, one of the things that we get to do with jealousy is to name it, but also name how we feel about it. Like, I'm angry about it. I'm sad about it. I am frustrated that I'm feeling this some kind of way, God. But that's how we pray. We bring it and submit it to Christ, as a Christian, to Jesus, right? And then we can recognize it for what it's inviting us to do. Okay, why am I jealous? Am I insecure about myself? Am I not feeling confident about maybe my femininity and how I'm putting myself out there? Like, what's this really inviting me into? Be curious about what that could be working inside of you, right? So I remind women who are, like single and they're single and waiting. I'm like, girl, are you just waiting around for like God to drop the man into your doorstep? Like, let's talk about going out there, some country club action, some like let's go to a hiking or like city walking event, like whatever it is. Allowing her to not just marinate in, like I said earlier, festering in
Mm.
that emotion. Because once we start to fester in jealousy, right, we're actually not contending with what we get to heal within us, right? And some of the time, it is when a woman is alone, she's just in her thoughts, she's on TikTok or on Instagram, looking at some other like femininity, whatever content, and ruminating like over this jealousy instead of putting her body into like an involved situation, like a networking event or speed dating, or I don't know what, like lately it's been hiking dates and like hiking clubs because these are some of the ways that women have been meeting men lately. I'm like, when you are jealous, it is because you are not looking beyond what you already have. And life itself has so much for you to have. So what are you not having? And so I often encourage these women, okay, let's stop like ruminating on the fact that you're jealous and get out there and let life penetrate you. Let life give you pleasure and let life help you feel alive in your own body. That's the antidote many times to a single woman who's jealous of what other women have and what she does not have. Right? So it's
Yes.
being in right relationship with the masculine in life itself, because life in courtship has a slew of experiences, barring, the things that are against your morals and against your values, of course, right? But yeah, that is a
Yes.
typical antidote for jealousy in a single woman,
Mm.
is to like not marinate and fester, let it fester, but kind of like apply the like tincture of life into it. Okay, gonna go out and like really be in my body in the company of other young people, right?
Mm.
Going out there, going on a hiking. I'm sorry I keep referencing this, but this is what a lot of my clients are doing now. They're going on hiking because it's a usually like a unisex type of gathering, like going out there and just like being in life with other people who are also like putting themselves in enjoyment's way, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Mm,
So instead of choosing to be stuck, you
yeah.
decide to go out and allow
Mm-hmm.
yourself to receive the provision of life.
Yeah. It's to
That,
see everything as provision. Even the jealousy, even the trigger is provision.
yes.
It is like your spiritual like provision. It's like jealousy, you can fester in it, or you can say, okay, this is having me like get up off my sulking butt and putting myself out there, looking good, feeling good in my body, feeling like the air on my face and like the grass beneath my feet and the company of people around me, right? Like this is to be in your feminine is not like an outfit or a behavior that you contort to, but it is first like letting your femininity be for you. And it starts with having a sensorial relationship with life before you even have a relationship with another person, like
Mm,
like your match or your committed partner for life, right? There's nothing
exactly.
lonelier than a married woman whose entire life is just her spouse, and she can't like be alone for 9 hours while he's at work and enjoy like life itself,
Yes.
right? So women, we are not just in relationship or in, like waiting to be in relationship with a man. Like the masculine is in life itself, all of its experiences and opportunities and flavors, right? And so if we are like able to be in relationship with that first, then when we are with a man, we are already like fully resourced, right? And
Yes.
there is no like room for insecurity to kind of like fester because we are in right relationship with what God has provided all men and women, regardless, right, of their marital status or their single status.
I love that you said that femininity is first for yourself. I don't
It
think that a
is.
lot of women would even, think about that. And that
Mm,
really goes into the first point in this podcast episode about femininity being sensuality
yeah.
and how that is something that you get to cultivate first. Because that, at least for me and in my experience and so many women that I've talked to, let's say you get married and you've never cultivated this relationship with yourself. Well, I ran into a lot of issues with even with sex because
Yes.
I was completely out of touch with my femininity, my
Oh, yeah.
sensuality,
Let's
and
talk
my
about that.
senses.
Mm.
So if we're holding on to this beautiful protective paradigm, which is to see marriage as sacred, as holy, a covenant union, which we're both very much about. But so many women, in my experience, me being one of them, once we get married, we sort of see that, okay, there's something that's not working because I have been literally not realizing it, but literally rejecting a part of myself up until
Oh,
this
yeah.
point. And I thought that now that I'm in marriage, I've said yes in front of the priest, that should magically make it
Turn
work.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is where I think you and I have a common burden, so to speak, like for women who grew up maybe in church, and there was this separation of like your sensual nature to the rest of your humanity. So I think I'll speak a little into purity culture for me as an
Mm-hmm.
experience and what that was like. So I was in the first generation of purity culture, like the 1990s. I was 16 years old when, oh no, I was 19 years old when I Kissed Dating Goodbye came out, right? So I got it. I got the full treatment, right? Maybe not, we didn't have these weird rituals that they had, with like the purity rings and the purity balls. There wasn't any of that yet. That came a little later on, but like
Right.
we had the whole if you feel some kind of something for a boy, like turn that off. And same for the boys too. Like I went through an episode where, oh my gosh, I've never shared this in public, but like I was made to dress like a man because like your body is distracting some of the boys like in church. And I'm like,
Oh
really? I was like 20, I think, at this time and fully an adult, right? I mean, like you're an adult at 20, but um in this time in my life when this and I don't blame this book. Josh is actually a friend, right? So like I do not blame this book, but I did see how it and other like narratives floating around at the time became very attractive because this was a deliberate like counterculture movement against hookup culture in the 90s, specifically um, hookup culture and AIDS, right? That was the huge like wave of conservative Christian values back then. And so I was taught your body as a woman is a stumbling block. So wear pants
Mm.
to so I was part of a very prolific and successful evangelical ministry in my country back then. I'm like, okay, I want to obey God. I want to like I'm reading this book, and it makes sense, right? Without knowing that there is actually truth to some of that. Like there's truth to a woman having difficulty pair bonding the more sexual partner she has. I mean, this is a real problem right now with the whole like body count generation and like women women's sexual revolution and being able to sleep with as many men as men sleep with women, right? So there was utility in some of the provisions of purity culture. It just didn't have to be what it became, if this kind of like behemoth of like legalism that it eventually became, that cut women off from relationship with their physicality and their sensuality. So when I got married, it wasn't comfortable for me to have sex, right? Because again, when you're brought up in a paradigm, and I got married at 28, right? I was 28 years old. So 8 years after this book came out. So that's 8 years of the same messaging of like, and about 5 years of singleness because me and my husband started to go together when I was like 26. So like years of like implanting of this, if you show your legs, like the guys at church are going to get distracted. And I'm like, okay. And so I would not wear the skirts that were to my knees. I had to wear them like to my ankles, like things like this, like modest is hottest came about back then. Long story short, when I realized like that I was so frigid and so closed off in my marriage, I knew that, wait a minute, there is something that I was not taught how to do or how to be, because I thought marriage was supposed to be like, go and have babies, right? And I didn't know how to do that, right? I didn't know how to do that. So it's kind of like this whole um, gap that I did not have the education or the guidance around. And these days, what I help women with is to heal from so obviously a lot of these women have healed from these wounds. They've seen therapists, they've done some healing work, some internal work, some somatic work to be in relationship again with their bodies. But for me, like the journey was pretty long for me. I think it was about a year for me of learning the mechanics, so to speak, right? And again, I don't make that wrong because like that is a part of what you grow in marriage, right? So I don't say like, okay, like we should have these classes in singles ministry where we talk about like copulation. I mean, like, let's just say what it is, right? It's not that, but it's creating spaces for young women and young men to have open discussions about these things without migrating to the idea, oh, if we teach them, they're all going to come together and have sex together. Because that's what it was. That was it. That was like the fear-based control in our singles ministry. So I think like, and this is why I speak to some people, they're in singles ministries, they're in dating, in dating networks within churches and among churches. And I hope it's happening. I hope it's happening that there are spaces for single people to learn how to activate their senses, not so that they'll go and have sex premaritally, but so that when they get married, they are actually in right relationship with this body and with the body of their partners without fear and without judgment and without deadening. I think that was my biggest thing that I had to like heal from, was deadening my sex drive, like making it dead, because it was meant to be feared while I was single, because it was carnal and it was my flesh and all of these things, right? So, yeah, I mean, I know my children will not grow up with that, because now this is an aspect of what I teach women. And I think what you teach women, like, I love your meditations on like the juiciness and like the softness. Like, these are the things that we can have the language for, and we can have the context for, and they can still be holy. Because I think we've made like sensuality unholy, but it is holy, because before sin, male and female, he created them, and he created us to be the feeling body of our male partners. Like, there's a reason why, and I don't know what the age range is for this podcast, but there's a reason why our husbands like to make love and see us. They like to look at us and, what is, like, how is this, how is she receiving this? That's it. That is the kind of like the male and female relationship, the goodness and the holiness of sex in marriage between a husband and wife who have full ownership and agency of their male and female nature. So I do a lot of this right now I have a singles membership, and then I have a married women membership, and we sort through some of the programming that we received and some of the notions that we took on unconsciously, and guiding women through like faith-based practices that are safe for them to feel into their sensuality again. Yeah, and I feel like that's a layer of like a Titus 2 ministry, if I can use that euphemism, for at least what women, faith believing women, would benefit from. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something else that you personally like to do, or that you personally are very conscious of cultivating on a daily basis when it comes to your sensuality?
Well, like, what I like to do is, I didn't have this growing up. I didn't have like the aspect of giving myself pleasure, because it was always connoted with, like the M word. That was it. Like, pleasuring yourself, that's the M word.
Yep.
But that absolutely is not what it is. So what I like to do is, I have a very luxurious, luxuriating, like pre-bed experience. So I like to shower alone by myself, like with my oils and my different fragrances and whatever. Like, I like to feel and be in my body. And the juiciness of that is, I'm a little bit heavier now. I'm 40. I'm a little bit more curvy and I've filled up in certain places. But I like love my body in a non-egoic sense. Like I love this body, I love my curves, I love my breasts, I love my thighs. Like I daily practice feeling my body in a sensual way for myself, not sexually, sensually. So breast massage, I like to do like a daily massage of my breasts. I like to do a nice like luxuriating practice of stretching, like more like yin poses that are relaxing on my bed. I have this furry blanket that I bought. It's called actually a free bleed blanket. It's like a furry waterproof blanket, and I free bleed during certain times in the month, right? I and for a lot of women, this is already very edgy, but this is something that I've built as a practice throughout the years of not feeling ashamed to be female and a woman in my body. So I would say that this has become like, it feels strange talking about it because it's just what I do, right? It's like I love my period. Like I don't regret, I'm not dreading it, right? Like I love it. I love that I get to stay home. I love that I can, my children, they know like when mom has her period, she's going to be like lying down, and she's going to be like eating chocolate, and she's going to be reading or sleeping, like to really be at home with how that aspect of the feminine can own herself, right? And so, depending on the lens that you're looking at this with, you might judge me, and that's fine. Like I don't feel judged. I just know that there are some women that's not yet where they might be in relationship to their sensuality and their own body, but that we can get there. I wasn't here like 3 years ago, right? But like through a lot of like cultivating relationship with my own body, um, and I don't think it's done yet. There can always be new ways to love our bodies, sensual touch, right? Just having a practice. And notice I'm not doing this with my partner. Like one of the things that one of my mentors, he's a gentleman, he's a doctor, and he's like, sex is just sex. Sex is sex, right? That's for the both of you. A woman needs to be able to feel her femininity for herself. So this is where I come from. It's like biologically, for us to be able to enjoy things like sex, we have to enjoy ourselves, right? That's why I love the work that you do, like your music and your meditations and the juiciness of how you love your feminine body. That's like women can start there, right? Start being in relationship through the environment that you place yourself in and just how your senses awaken to like really good music or like a really nice somatically led meditation. Like these are the ways we can start to say, like, hello, like you're loved, you're appreciated, you're beautiful, you're sensual. And then, oh my gosh, when you're in a courtship or if you're married, when you're with your husband, without you even doing anything, they will notice. They notice it, and it's not because you did anything to them to notice you. That is an organic, like, emanation of
Mm.
true feminine power. Our power is not to do something to achieve power. It is to just be fully in this body, in your beingness, and somehow, some kind of way that emanates, touches people,
Oh,
even
yes.
blesses people. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that. I love that. And just experiencing it, it can be such a liberating thing for a woman.
Yes.
And this is what I'm sure we both want for all women to experience, is that
Mm.
organic emanation of your feminine juiciness. It's so good.
Yes.
It's so good.
So good.
I loved everything you talked about today. This is going to be such a valuable episode for all of us. But before you go, Martine, tell us where we can
Mm.
find you online.
Yep. So I run everything off Instagram now. So I'm at Feminine Womanhood on Instagram. So you can just find me there. I have like in my bio all my links. I have a free 5-day devotion to the masculine. So that's like a free Facebook group with an entire like free program in there, 5 days of classes where you can start like getting your feet wet into healing with the masculine. I have a free email series, Provider Men and Cherished Women. So that's like a 9-part series if you want to learn, like, particularly how to be like a provided for woman by life itself, not just the literal like man providing for you sense. That's also free. Um, yeah, and I have a couple of other offers there for single women and for married women. So just check that out. Feminine
Yeah.
Womanhood on Instagram.
Yes. I will be putting all the links in the show notes for you to
Thank
check
you.
those out. Thank you so much, Martine. It's always a pleasure.
Thank
I
you.
hope you have a wonderful day.
You too. This was so good.
Okay, where is the stop recording?